Daf Nun Beis Amud Beis, the second line from the top. Rav Meir Omer Kol She'achal Orev. Rav Meir said if a person could be ma'arav with pas, he could be ma'arav with bread and he's not, and he doesn't, it's a chomer gamel. He can only walk, he can only travel in the area that overlaps the two locations. So in the case that we had in the Mishnah, a person is in one city, he wants to make a verbal declaration in a spot between this city and another city. According to Rav Yehuda, it's valid, but according to Rav Meir, he says he made a verbal declaration. He did not use pas. He could have used pas. He's not an ani. He could have brought bread to the location. So he says, therefore, it is not valid, and it's not a valid Erev, and therefore he can only travel in the area that overlaps the two. So if his house is here, he made a verbal declaration here, he can travel in the area between the two, but he can't travel in the area in the opposite directions of the two areas where they don't overlap. So, we learned already beforehand on Daf Lamed Hey. Safek, if there's a Safek, Rav Meir, Rav Yehuda, memorize a chomer gamel. If it's a Safek, we treat it as a chomer gamel. So a case over there that was we discussed earlier is an Erev to be valid. The bread the pas has to be intact. It has to be there on the onset of Shabbos. If it's consumed or destroyed before the Shabbos, it's not a valid Erev. If it's a safek, if you're not sure whether it was destroyed before Shabbos or after Shabbos, so it's a safek, it's a chomer gamel, and therefore you can only travel in the area that overlaps both of the Erevs, his current location and where he put down the Erev. So we already learned this concept that you can only travel in the area that the two locations, the two Eruvim, overlap each other. Rav Sheshes says, no, this is a whole different concept over here. It's not in our Mishnah, the reason that it's a chomer gamel, that you can only go into the area, you can only travel the area where the two Eruvim overlap, is not because of safek. As we'll see, in our case, there's no safek here. It's not a question of a safek. So he said, Rav Sheshes, lo yitem b'tamid Rav Meir, safek Erev, safek lo Erev. Don't say that the reason that over here that it's a safek, whether it's an Erev or not, and that's why you can only go travel on the common area. No, that's not the pshat. So don't say safek Erev, safek lo Erev, hu d'have chomer gamel. Avavadai lo Erev, but in a case when it's certainly not an Erev, lo have chomer gamel, then we would not say it's a chomer gamel. No. Elafil vadai lo Erev, even in a case where it's vadai lo Erev, where it's certainly not an Erev, have chomer gamel. It's also, we say it's a chomer gamel, you can only travel in the areas where they overlap. Dahacha vadai lo Erev, because over here it's certainly not an Erev, kahave chomer gamel, and we say it's a chomer gamel. Now over here in our case, it's not a question of a safek. He made a verbal declaration that he wants his Erev to be in some place in the midpoint between the two cities, between the two houses. Now Rav Meir says it's not valid to make a verbal declaration, and it's not valid. So therefore, it's certainly not in Erev. Now why does Rav Meir say that in this case over here, it's a chomer gamel, he can only travel in the common area? So the pshat is not because it's a safek. It's because we say when he verbally designated an area, he made a verbal declaration, that means he's renounced, he's given up the traveling, the area that he could travel in the opposite direction from his current location. He's in the house here, which would allow 2,000 amas in each direction. By saying, I want my Erev to be here, that means, by saying that, I'm saying I'm giving up traveling in that location. Rav Meir says, you've given it up, so you don't have it. Now, even though this Erev is not valid, so you can't travel 2,000 amas in that location, because this Erev is not valid, but your renouncing of traveling in that other location still takes effect. So therefore, you can only travel in the common area because this part of it is really, it's not really relevant of what the declaration that you made, because it's not valid. So you can travel in the common area, meaning what you've given up by making this declaration, that still takes effect. You lost that. You haven't gained this Erev in this location, so you can only travel in the area between them because you haven't given that up. By making the declaration over here, you haven't given up the area, the 2,000 amas between them. You haven't given that up, so you still have that. So you have that common area, because that you haven't given up. But you have given up in the opposite direction, in the area outside the tchum of where you made the verbal declaration. So that's the pshat in Rav Meir. Now, so according to this pshat, therefore, there's a whole new understanding in the case on Daf Lamed Hey about the Erev that was consumed. So till now we thought that according to Rav Meir, if the Erev was definitely consumed before Shabbos, so therefore we assumed it was definitely consumed before Shabbos, the new Erev doesn't take effect, and you revert to your original Erev, which is in fact what Rav Yehuda holds. But now we're saying no, it really doesn't make a difference whether the Erev was consumed before Shabbos or not consumed before Shabbos, because according to Rav Meir, the point isn't that it's because of a safek. According to Rav Yehuda, it's a question of a safek. If we don't know if it was consumed before Shabbos or after Shabbos, so we don't know which Erev takes effect, you can only travel in the area that's common between them. But according to Rav Meir, even if we know that it was certainly consumed before Shabbos, and therefore, if we know therefore that definitely, certainly the new Erev that you made does not take effect, you still don't revert to the original Erev, because by making the new Erev, you've given up the walking in the opposite direction. By making the new Erev, you've given up traveling in the area outside the tchum of that new Erev, traveling in the opposite direction. So therefore, that takes effect. Therefore, it's a Chomer Gamal not because of Safek. It's a Chomer Gamal because by making a new Erev, even if it's not valid, you've renounced walking in the opposite direction. If a person went outside his tchum, even one amma outside the tchum, like the Mishnah, lo yikanes, he cannot go back, he cannot re-enter his tchum. So the way Rashi seems to be learning is, Rashi says, we're talking, he did it b'mezid, umidas, and shaloin l'shem mitzvah. So therefore, in such a case, we say that if he goes outside his tchum, even one amma, he cannot go back in. Now, there is a reason to say that he should be able to go back in. He's outside the tchum. But when he's outside the tchum, he has dalet amas. Now, therefore, they overlap. His new tchum is, when he goes outside the tchum, he has dalet amas. If he's one amma outside his original boundary, then they overlap, and we should say, therefore, that havla's tchumim, they merge, and he should be able to go back in. Nevertheless, Afilu Amma Achas Lo Yikones, the Tanna Kama says. So right way Rashi learns it is because he did it b'mezid, so it seems to be that it's a knas, and we do not say havlos tchumim. We do not merge the tchumim. Rashi's mashma though, however, would be ba'inus, then we would say havlos tchumim, that they're overlapped, they merge, and they're considered as one. It's one area, and you can go back in. And the Shari Tzion is medayik that that's where the Balamor holds as well. But Smash from Taisis that no, it doesn't make a difference. Even Shaige, even Ba'ines, we do not hold of Havloas Tchum according to Tanakama. But Rabbi Lezer Aimesh Taimi Konis, he says if he's only 2 amas past his original Tchum, he can go in. Sholosh Lei Konis. But if it's 3 amas, he can't go in. So he holds, Rabbi Lezer holds that Havloas Tchumim. That we merge the tchum. And now Rabbi Lezer, as we learned before, he says when a person goes outside his tchum, he has dalet amas, it means he has 2 amas in each direction. Not 4 amas in each direction, but 2 amas. So therefore, if he's only 2 amas outside the tchum, then the 2 tchumim, the old one and the new, merge. They're joined together. If he's more than 2, then he is now the two tchumim do not join together. They're not joined together. They're separated because his new tchum is daled amas, but only 2 amas in each direction. So if he's more than 2 amas away from his original tchum, they're not joined, and therefore you can't re-enter the tchum. So therefore, shtayim yikanes, shalosh lo yikanes. If it's more than 2, you can't go in. Look the Gemara. Let's say he has 1 foot inside the original tchum, and the other foot outside lo yikanes. You can't go in. It's still considered to be outside the tchum. How do we know this? Because of the ksiv tashiv mishabas raglecha. If you will restrain yourself from going outside the tchum, and it says im tashiv mishabas raglecha, your foot, meaning you can't even have 1 foot outside the tchum. So therefore he says 1 foot outside is considered outside the tchum. We learn in the Brisa raglecha b'seicha tchum raglecha chutl tom yikanes. You can go back in. It's not considered like you're outside the tchum. Our answer is Hamani. Whose opinion is this in the Brisa? That's Achir. That's the opinion of Achir. The sign they learn in the Brisa Achir Moimrim L'Makam Sharuba Hunizkar, that we put the person, we throw him into the place. Literally, we throw him into the place where most of his body is. Meaning, he's deemed to be. The place that he's deemed to be is where most of his body is. So if he's only 1 foot outside the tchum, he's not considered to be outside the tchum. Some say 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Yikanes. He is allowed to go in. And even though it's not written with the Lashon Rabbim, it's not written with a Yud, but Raglecha Karinan. But the way we pronounce it is Raglecha in the plural. Meaning, according to the first Mahalach, it's Raglecha Ksiv. The Ksiv, the way it's written, is in the singular because it's written without a Yud. But over here, he says the way we pronounce it, the way the Kriya is Raglecha, is in the plural. So, meaning, if you restrain yourself, your feet, from going outside the tchum, meaning you're only considered outside the tchum if it's both feet. The Brisa says lo yikanes, you cannot go in if you have 1 foot out, even 1 foot lo yikanes. Our answer is Huda Amar Chanina. He holds kacher. The Tanya Lachem says Lamalkam Sharuba Hunizkar. Where is he considered to be? Where most of his body is. So if it's only 1 foot out, most of his body is in. He's still considered to be in the tchum, not outside the tchum. Rabbi Eliezer Mershtayim Yikonos, he says if there's 2, you can go back in. Shalosh lo yikonos. If there's 3, you're outside the tchum, and the tchumim have not been merged. But if you're only within 2, the 2 tchumim, the old and the new, are touching each other. They overlap, they merge, and therefore you can go back in. Frek the Gemara about Tanya Rabbi Eliezer achas yikonos, shtayim lo yikonos. Rabbi Eliezer says if it's only 1 amma outside the tchum, you can, but 2 you can't go in. Well, it says leikasha. What we mean to say is the meaning is the same. Meaning you can't be more than 2 amas away. Like the Mishnah. This Mishnah is talking where he was went 1 amma outside, and he was standing within the second amma, so he was not more than 2 amas away. So then, that's when you can go in. But the Brisa, it says, is talking about a case where he's 2 amas away, and he's in the 3rd amma. Meaning it's just a question of terminology. When the Brisa says that achas yikonos shtayim lo yikonos, means when he's 2 amas, when he's already completely 2 amas out, and he's in the 3rd amma, then you can't go back in. But they're both saying the same thing, that it's as long as he's within 2 amas outside the tchum, he can go back in. Frek the Gemara, what do you mean about time we learn in the Brisa for Rabbi Eliezer Aimer? Afilu amma achas lo yikanes. It says clearly, even 1 amma you can't go in. It says clearly. Or it says no. Kitanya, that's referring to a different case entirely. That's not talking about a case where a person is outside his tchum. We're talking where a person is outside his tchum. Now he has a new daled amas. He has a new daled amas. Then we say the question is the old and the new tchumim, do they merge? Do they overlap? Do we say have lost tchumim and he can re-enter? That case is talking about lemoided, a person who was measuring, meaning he was traveling on the road and he was kind of shvisa in a certain spot. Now he wants to go from there, he wants to go to a certain city. So he's pacing off, he's measuring 2,000 amas, and that's the extent of where he can go. Meaning, as we learned before, he really has 2,004 amas. He has the malkam, his malkam of shisa. He designated his spot. Now he's measuring from that dalet amas. He's measuring 2,000 amas, and he wants to measure off to see if that will lead him into a city. Now it says over there that if he's even one amma, he's in one amma from the city, he can't go in. He can't go into the city because you're limited. In that case, he's limited to 2,000 amas. And wherever that 2,000 amas ends, that's the end of his chum, and he can't go beyond that. And even if the city is one amma away, he can't go in. That's talking about Lamaida. The son of Lamaida Shamru, Naisalo Paimam. If a person is measuring off the 2,000 amas, he's pacing it off. So they give him 2,000 amas. Afilu Saif Midasa Kalabamar. And wherever it ends, it ends. Even if it ends in the middle of a cave, he doesn't have the whole cave. A person, on the onset of Shabbos, he was in the cave, or if he was in the city, that's all considered one. So he measures 2,000 amas from beyond the city. But if Tchum was outside the city, he's measuring 2,000 amas. Wherever it ends, it ends. Even if it ended in the city, he would not be able to travel the entire city. Wherever it ends, it ends. Here also we're saying that afilu amma achas lo yikanes, even if it's one amma away from the city, wherever it ends, it ends. Because even if it ended in the city, it would still end right there as well. There's no havlos tchumim in that case, so it's a different issue completely over there. But in terms of our case over here, when he went beyond the tchum, and he has now a new tchum of 4 amas, then Rabbi Elazar says there's havlos tchumim, but there's only 2 amas in each direction, so therefore, if he's within 2 amas of his original tchum, he can re-enter, but not more than 2 amas. Zog the Mishnah, so a person, which is dark, and he's outside the boundary of the city, he's outside the tchum boundary, afilu amma achas, even if it's 1 amma, lo yikanes, he cannot enter. Rav Shimon Aimer, afilu 15 amma yikanes. He says even 15 amas you could. She'ein mashuchas memasenes amidas, because the people who mark off the tchum, the surveyors, that they mark off, they measure the tchum, so they set the boundary 2,000 amas away from the city, they're not precise, because of people who make a mistake. I mean, so even though they measure it and they say, oh, here's where the tchum ends, really there's a little bit more. To account for error, they make it the tchum, they make it further in right than it really is. It really is. The tchum is really further out. They make it a little bit further in, so to take into account the mistakes that the surveyors make, that people make, so they're more machmir, and they say, oh, the tchum ends here, it ends earlier, when really it's really further away, but they account for that, and they're more machmir, and they bring the boundary further in. So therefore, he says, you can, efilo 15 amma yikones, even 15 amas, because the tchum measurement is not precise. So Rashi has 2 pshatim. One is that if 15 is just an estimation, it's not a precise number, that they generally pull the tchum back by an area of at least 15 amas, so therefore, b'diavad, you can rely on that. According to the second pshat in Rashi, the 15 amas is a precise amount, is a precise measurement, because the surveyors, as we'll see further on, the surveyors used to measure it with ropes, that each rope was a rope of 50 amas long. So you had, for 2,000 amas, if you measured with ropes of 50 amas, you need to measure it 50 into 2,000 is 40. So there'll be 40 ropes, or 40 times that it was measured. So, and each rope was held by the fist of the surveyor, one on each end. So therefore, the fists that held the ropes took up 2 tefachim and an etzba per rope. So it wasn't measuring along the end of the ground because that's where they held the rope. Now, so if you take on the 40 ropes, 2 tefachim is 80 tefachim. So if you have two tefachim per rope, and you add it 40 times, that's 80. And an etzba is 40 etzbois. There's 4 etzbois in a tefach. So that's another 10 tefachim. That's 90. 90 tefachim is, there's 6 tefachim in an amma. So 90 tefachim, that is 15 ammas. So that's how you have the shir of 15 ammas. So therefore, you have that leeway of that 15 ammas. Talna, the Gemara says, Mibnei Tayim Mida. It says, Mibnei Tayim, as we mentioned before, as we explained before, the Tayim Mida, the errors that surveyors, when they measure, the imprecise measurement of the surveyors. How do you measure the cities? We'll see the next parak.